Hello folks, I'm Alex, this is Alex Unabridged, and this is the roadmap of your life tag. So welcome back to the channel if that is the case. Yeah, it's a tag for you today. This is the roadmap of your life tag. This is a fab tag. I love this one. This was created by Tristan at Tristan L Space Books, and I was tagged by Debs at Rainer Reads Stuff. So thank you for that tag, Debs. I will of course link to both of those channels and their videos in the description, as always. So the prompts for this then, there are only two, and they're both about books, that relate to places you've lived. So let's get straight into the prompts then. The first one, what is a book that reminds you of or takes place in each place that you've lived? This could mean country, state or province, city or town, or apartment or house. Just come up with a book that really resonates with you and the time you spent in each place where you've had a mailing address. So let's start at the very beginning then, where I lived for 18 years, where I was born and grew up. And that's in Lincolnshire, in a little village between sort of Grimsby and Cleethorpes sort of area and Louth near Lincoln. The seasidey type stuff I don't necessarily have bad memories of, but I don't have necessarily really fond memories of that sort of side of the environment that I lived in. It was okay, but it was never really my cup of tea. What I do really have sort of fond memories of and what resonates is my time spent in Louth. And that was my sixth form years, when I was doing my A-levels. I went to King Edward VI Grammar School in Louth, and that is where my kind of book choice or writer choice really, I guess, comes in with this, and that's Tennyson, and particularly The Lady of Shalott, because Tennyson went to the same school. That's part of why I loved that school and that school environment. There is a history to it, and it introduced me to some sort of classic literature and some culture that I hadn't got before from my kind of comprehensive school near Cleethorpes. It was a very different sort of school. The school in Louth, not a private school, state school, but very, very different, very much more like the traditional grammar school. The Lady of Shalott in particular, there was a pub in Louth called the Lady of Shalott, because of course there was, that I used to go to when I was a sixth former. But yeah, the Lady of Shalott, it's got that kind of, certainly in the first couple of stanzas of it, it's got kind of a feel of sort of the pastoral kind of elements that are sort of evident in sort of Lincolnshire life. There's sort of, I think there's even reference to the wolds or to wolds, and this Louth is on the edge of the Lincolnshire wolds. It's something that we read at school. It's something that was kind of very much a part of the kind of the culture of the town, things like that, along with Tennyson's other works. But yeah, some Tennyson, I think, for the first one. Okay, so when I finished my my A-levels and I left Lincolnshire, never to return, certainly not to live anyway. I went not that far actually. I only went across the Humber River to Hull, to Kingston upon Hull, to do my studying for my degree. So this was 1999, and I started off in Hull studying Scandinavian studies. I only lasted a year, but in that year, I had to read various different things as part of Scandinavian studies, various different plays, novels, and obviously learn a language, which was Danish for a bit. But the book that I've picked is the only one I remember actually really liking. that I read in that year. Is kind of the sort of the jewel really of that year's study, whereas everything else I kind of really didn't get on with. And that book is The Sharks by Jens Bjørnboe from 1974, Bjørnboe being a Norwegian author. This is set aboard a ship in 1899, ships travelling from Manila to Marseille via Rio, I think. It's got a multinational crew, this ship, and it is constantly pursued by sharks. There is mutiny and shipwreck and, you know, various other things that you kind of expect from that kind of seafaring adventure. I think it, you know, it's compared to and is comparable in some respects to Moby Dick, but substitute the whale from Moby Dick for the sharks in this as the kind of the symbolic core of it. There are actual sharks in it. And there's definitely like seafaring adventure to be had. It's but it's social commentary, I think. It's gripping at times. The narrator character of Jensen is excellent. It's very atmospheric from what I remember. Gives you plenty to think about. I think it's, you know, it can be exciting. It can also be quite depressing. It is social commentary. It's largely psychological and social commentary. It's one of those. I don't think you can find his stuff readily in print still. But if you can get hold of a copy of The Sharks, I do thoroughly recommend it. And yeah, I've picked this one because, as I say, it does remind me of Scandinavian studies when I think of my time doing that particular year of a degree. That's the thing that always jumps out at me is the Book of the Sharks. I remember being terrified when I saw it on the reading list because I have this phobia of sharks, but actually, you know, it's not it's not a scary one in that respect. So that's the first one, and then another one that I've picked for this kind of phase of my life is Arabian Nights. And this is, of course, this collection of Middle Eastern folk tales compiled originally in Arabic, obviously, during the kind of the golden age, the Islamic golden age. Includes you know, historical tales, love stories, tragedies, comedies, and certainly in translation you will know some of the most famous ones like Aladdin and the Wonderful Lamp, Ali Baba and 40 Thieves, Seven Voyages of Sinbad the Sailor, things like that. But that one I've picked because that was the first big piece of theatre that I did, was an adaptation of Arabian Nights, and that was when I switched degrees to drama from Scandinavian studies, and that's what my degree ended up actually being, and the one I completed was drama. This was the first piece of theatre that I did as a first year that I was involved in that really made me kind of go, yeah, I'm in the right place. I've found my home here. This is home. This drama department, this theatre, these people that I'm working with, they are my home. That particular production was magical. It was, it's a word that it's used a lot, but for me that was absolutely magical. I could have watched that just night after night after night after night for months. There was puppetry, there was great effects, there was it was done on a stage which we filled with sand, and it's just it was fantastic. It was a real introduction to what could be done whilst I was at university, and yeah, absolutely brilliant, loved it. So when I finished my degree in theatre in 2003, I got a job. I was very lucky to get a job straight out of university, and that was all the way down south in Winchester in Hampshire. I went down there to be the technical manager of a brand new theatre building at a school down there. And it was a girls' school. It was a private girls' school. So there was a lot of money there, hence why they had this big, grand new theatre built that I went to kind of like kit out and managed for the first year. And I lived on site as well at the girls' school. They very kindly gave me an ensuite room in one of the boarding houses. It's a boarding school, of course it was. And let me tell you, that was quite a culture shock coming from a very northern, quite deprived town of Hull. To a very affluent, should we say, very affluent, very southern historic city of Winchester, and going into that school environment as well, a school which was completely different from anything I'd ever known. And the book I've picked for this is Murder Most Unladylike by Robin Stevens, which is a murder mystery set in a girls' school. It's a middle grade book. Murder mystery set in a girls' school, I think in the 1930s, if I'm right. But it's got the flavour of what I remember from working in this private girls' school in Winchester. The sort of things, even the sort of ways some of the students speak, the sort of culture, the sort of environment. It's kind of that Murder Most Unladylike is kind of almost a modern day kind of Mallory Towers with murder in it kind of thing. It's a modern book, and it has modern kind of sensibilities, as in it's very inclusive. It's great stuff, this, by Robin Stevens. I really like these. There's a whole series of them. But it certainly has that flavour that I remember from the school in Winchester where I worked. As I say, it was a very different sort of environment down there. There were kids of politicians, kids of diplomats, sort of, major leaders had their kids in that school. Very, very different, very, very well-to-do. But a very enjoyable year, I have to say, of my life. But at the end of that year, I decided I wanted to study some more. I wanted to try and go eventually get my PhD. And so I moved back up to Hull, went back to university there, and did a master's in gender studies, part-time, over 2 years, and then a first year of a PhD as well, back in theatre up there. But I don't necessarily connect my sort of best memories to the study that I did at that period of my university life. That's very different going back as a postgraduate student, and certainly as a PhD student, than it was being an undergrad. It's a very, very different lifestyle. And certainly because I was working as well, like pretty much full time whilst I was doing my degree, my master's particularly. Very different sort of life. But the thing that I have the most fond memories of that period is the friendships that I made up there, and one in particular. In my, I think, second year of my master's, a fella moved in opposite me, in the house opposite me. I lived on this little 10-foot, what we call 10-foot, which is basically just a path down the middle between two rows of Victorian houses off a kind of a little side street, really tucked away. A fella moved in opposite me, and through my housemate we got chatting, and that was the beginning of a beautiful friendship, shall we say. A friendship who it's still there today. Joe is my best buddy and always will be. He is family. Joe introduced me to so much stuff in terms of a different way of thinking completely. He changed the way that I see the world, and for that I will always be just like truly thankful. He introduced me to so much new philosophy, just a different, more questioning, slightly more rebellious way of thinking, I think is how I'd put it. Counterculture, subcultures, all that kind of stuff. And visually speaking, getting me into like digital art and animation and kind of filmmaking that was a bit sort of different from what I was very mainstream at that point. But like, yeah, stuff like that. So the book that I have picked for this one is one that always reminds me of that period, and that is A Scanner Darkly. Largely, I mean, I saw the film first. Joe introduced me to the film, the Linklater film, the animated rotoscoped movie, and I was fascinated by the visuals of that. But to start with, but really, what's kind of seeped in and kind of got its claws in was that kind of with the themes in it and the kind of the philosophy in it from Philip K. Dick. The ideas around identity, things like that. The ideas like scramble suits, that kind of science fiction. And yeah, I've read the book I think a couple of times since, and I'm going to reread it again soon, hopefully. But A Scanner Darkly was part of that awakening, should we say. So at the end of my first year of PhD study at Hull, my supervisor moved. She left the university and she went to Leeds University. And so I followed. But I didn't move to Leeds, I moved to Manchester instead and commuted for study. And I moved to Manchester because I'd met rather a lovely lass who lived in Manchester, who I was dating at the time, who said that she could put me up in her flat whilst I got settled and got sorted and got my own place sorted. I never moved out, and I married her 3 years later. But we spent our first 4 years together, my lovely wifey, in Manchester, so not quite city centre, but not too far out, on the edges of the city centre. And during that time, I stopped doing the PhD after another year at Leeds. It became too much. It was the wrong time for me, and commuting and working full time and all that kind of stuff. It didn't work. So I gave that up and I went back into theatre properly. But the main thing that I remember about this period of living in Manchester was the upheaval, really, the major life changes that happened. And that was the beginning of my transition, my gender transition. I started hormones in 2009. And that period was interesting, shall we say. Lots of changes, lots of very difficult to manage changes. Great changes that I wanted, and changes that I'm very, very glad that happened. But still, that was quite a shock, quite a interesting period. And so the book I've picked for this is Grasshopper Jungle by Andrew Smith. Largely because it just reminds me of that time of dealing with essentially a second puberty, I was a teenage boy, dealing with that is difficult, I think, whether you're in your teenage years or whether you're like 30 like I was. It's an interesting, as I say, it's an interesting experience. And yeah, the main character in Grasshopper Jungle is dealing with that, dealing with his hormones, dealing with his sexuality, his identity, as was I. My sexuality shifted quite a bit in those early years of starting hormones. And it's an upheaval, and it affects the people around you as it does in the book. There's yes, I didn't have to battle, man-eating 6 foot tall praying mantises and the end of the world, but I think some of that is kind of metaphorical. There was chaos going on kind of in my head and to a certain extent around me, affected by me somewhat. There's something about that book that really speaks to me about that particular period of my life. So Grasshopper Jungle. So then the last move for me was from Manchester City in 2011 when we bought our lovely little cottage, which is out near Glossop on the edge of the Peak District. We are in a little village called Broadbottom. Great name for a village. And we moved out here to get away from the city. Basically, we were both feeling the need to get out somewhere quieter, somewhere closer to the hills, to the landscape, where we could hike, where we could get some peace and quiet, and start making those moves out of that kind of busy, bustling life of living in a city, as when you're younger, to something back closer to what we had when we both grew up, both me and my wife. We both come from villages, both come from rural areas, and so we moved back out to this place, which is rural, but it's got good connections to Manchester. But one of the reasons why we really wanted to move out here is because we love walking in the area that's very close to us. And so the book I've picked for this one is, I've actually got the book here, and that is this one, Kinderscout, The People's Mountain. Kinderscout is sort of the main, the biggest mountain in the Dark Peak area of the Peak District. If I walk just up from my house up and onto the local ridge that I can see from my window, I can see Kinderscout just in the distance. I can walk to it from here if I wanted to. It's a long way. It'd probably be about 8 miles, I should think. But I can get there, I can walk to it if I want to. And I can certainly walk there regularly, and do walk there regularly. I mean, I love this book because it's got some fantastic, just some great photographs of Kindo in various different sort of seasonal conditions, and kind of, it's got big landscape shots. It's got some stuff about the rocks in here, the geology, the rock climbing, all that kind of stuff. It's got pictures of local people, and kind of community stuff as well. But it's got a lot of written stuff in it as well. There is there's a writer who's contributed called Ed Douglas. The photographer is John Beattie. But it covers the kind of the social and political and geological, ecological, cultural type stuff surrounding Kinderscout, because it's a really important area, and I think that's why I love it so much. Is there's a connection to history again there. And so there's stuff in there about the Kinder trespass and all the sort of legal stuff that went along with that, the political stuff. But as I say, also a lot about the community that lives and works on Kinderscout still, the artisans, the farmers, the craftspeople, the tradespeople, how it works, and as I say, the geology and the ecology. So it goes into so much stuff, and it's just a really good book, and really, as I say, really pretty pictures, but also really interesting writing, and reminds me of why we moved here in the first place. Really, it's a great one. I love Kinderscout so much. So there we go, and that is where I am today. So we're up to date. Okay, so prompt number 2 then is, since a roadmap not only shows where you've been, but also where you're going, what's a book that reminds you of or takes place in your next destination, or a place you'd like to live in? Well, I always thought that would be North Wales, specifically Eryri, formerly known as Snowdonia National Park. I don't think we'd necessarily move there these days. So Wales is somewhere that we will always go back to time and time again. We absolutely adore it. So the book I've picked for this is the Mabinogion, which is the earliest collection of Welsh prose stories, which was compiled in 12th, 13th century, I think, so Middle Welsh in terms of the language. And it was kind of compiled from earlier oral story traditions. It covers a number of different prose stories in a variety of kind of types. And I've done theatre adaptations of this, and it's a really interesting sort of historical piece of historical, kind of classical writing. And the thing I love about Wales is the history and the language. I really love the language. I've learnt a little bit of Welsh over the years myself, and I really, really like it. And I like listening to it, and I'd love to be able to read stuff at some stage in certainly modern Welsh. Yeah, it's the history with Wales and the culture and the folklore. There is some folklore in the Mabinogion, but there's a real charm to it. I find it fascinating. I find it really interesting. And it always, I always think of that when I'm in Wales and I hear the language and I see the history and the culture and stuff like that. It's, and I learn more about it. It always goes back to my, my first reading of and sort of working on a production of the Mabinogion. So I'm not necessarily going to move to Wales. But as I say, Wales is an area that I will continually go back to. It's one where I feel like it feels like home, even if it might never become home. It always feels like home when I go there. But the place where I will end up living, and probably sooner rather than later, as in hopefully within the next couple of years, we are currently making plans and putting in place things to make this happen. Me and my wife, that is the Cairngorms. We have been there a couple of times for a holiday in the last couple of years, and we have fallen head over heels in love with it. We know that is where we want to be. It's just so clear to us. It's one of those places where you just go, this is it. This is it. And the book I've picked for this, there is only one. And that is The Living Mountain. It has to be The Living Mountain by Nan Shepherd. This is such a beautiful, lyrically written piece. It's just praise for the Cairngorms. It's a meditation on a philosophical kind of meditation on belonging, on the affinity with wild places, very specifically to the Cairngorms. It's hugely influential nature writing, and I share Shepherd's awe and passion for that area. Absolutely, the landscape, the wilderness of it. That you can still get that level of wilderness in an area that even these days has a lot of tourism going to, but you can still find wilderness there. The nature that is there, the sort of variety of biomes, of the biodiversity, things like that. It's so awe-inspiring. And I mean that truly. We use the word awesome so often, and sort of, it's a throwaway thing now almost. But this is the definition for me of true awe. I am absolutely in awe of this area. And you can find that in Shepherd's writing, and it's so beautifully done, and I connected with that so much because I connected with that place so much. So there we go. That is a sort of whistle-stop tour of everywhere that I've lived, and where I'm going to be going, and some of the books that I think connect my experiences of those places. So the last thing left to do then is to tag a few folks. I've tried to think of people who I think might have lived a few interesting places. So if you've already been tagged, any of these people, then apologies, but I'm tagging you again. So I am tagging Priscilla at Evening Reader. I will tag Michelle over at Michelle's Melancholia. And I will tag my good buddy Troy, Mr. Troy Tranup. I know you're not doing BookTube stuff at the moment, Troy, but I know you've lived a fair few interesting places and have had a fair few interesting experiences and have read a fair few interesting books. So when you do jump back on to BookTube, then this will be sat waiting for you should you fancy doing it. So there we go, folks. That is it from me today. Thank you very much for watching, as always. Do drop your thoughts in the comments below. Are there any books that you particularly connect to places that you've lived? If you've lived in any of the places that I have lived and can suggest some other books that connect to those places, then let me know that too. It's always great to hear from you. I will be back on Friday with my plans for July, what I'm potentially going to be reading, all that kind of good stuff. So I do hope you will join me for that then. But from me, for now, that's ta-ra.